Good afternoon, everyone. I believe we should start very soon. If everyone can take their seats. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God Almighty,
Allow me to speak in English and in Arabic. Do we have translation? Can we test the translation, please? English, do they have? I cannot. I don't get the translation.
Yeah, it's fine. I can hear.
It's not working.
Can the chair hear the English channel? 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
in the name of God Almighty,
السادة الوزراء الموقرين،
distinguished ministers, excellencies,
السادة المندوبون الكرام،
distinguished delegates,
حضرات السيدات والسادة،
ladies and gentlemen,
أعلن افتتاح
I declare open the 25th session of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development and call to order its first meeting.
أود أن نرحب ترحيبا
I
حارا
wish to extend a very warm welcome to all.
نجتمع مرة أخرى
This year, once again, we are meeting
افتراضي.
in a virtual format.
أصحاب السعادة،
Excellencies,
السادة المندوبين الكرام،
distinguished delegates,
زملائي الأعزاء،
dear colleagues,
سيداتي والسادة،
ladies and gentlemen,
إنه لمن دواعي سروري
it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you
الجلسة الافتتاحية
to the opening
للدورة
session of the
السنوية
25th annual session,
ويسعدني أن أرى مشاركة
and I'm glad to see high-level representation from various parts of the world. Over the next 5 days, the annual session will address some pressing issues in the areas of science, technology, and innovation. In particular, we will consider two priority themes. The first is dedicated to Industry 4.0 for inclusive development, and there will be a high-level panel for this theme tomorrow. The second is on science, technology, and innovation for sustainable urban development in a post-COVID-19 world. The high-level panel for this theme will convene on Wednesday. The annual session will also review the progress made in the implementation of the World Summit on the Information Society outcomes on Thursday. On Friday, the final day of this 25th session, we will launch the Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Review Report of Zambia, followed by presentations of the Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Reviews for Botswana and Angola. Thereafter, we will hear the Bureau's assessment of the Commission's work as part of the ECOSOC's review of its subsidiary bodies. Ladies and gentlemen, after this opening session, we will be convening a high-level roundtable on the role of science, technology, and innovation in building back better from the coronavirus disease while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This will be the contribution of the Commission to the theme of the 2022 Economic and Social Council and the high-level political forum on sustainable development. I'm also pleased to announce that after the high-level roundtable, a special event called A Conversation with Great Minds will be held. This year's edition will feature a conversation with 4 highly distinguished academic scholars at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, and socioeconomic development. Registered participants of the 25th CSTD annual session can simply stay on this Zoom call. The event will also be live streamed on UN Web TV. The respective information on how to access the live stream can be found on the CSTD website or on the flyer that has been sent out. I would also like to inform you that there will be a number of side events taking place before or after the main sessions. For more information, I invite you to consult the program of the annual session. Ladies and gentlemen, since last session, this commission has been engaged in cooperation activities in several other fora. Mr. Peter Major and I, in our capacity as chairman ad interim and chairman of the 25th Commission, were proud to have been able to contribute with the CSTD's guidance and perspective to the work of several bodies of the UN, which is exactly the function that our commission is expected to play, given its cross-cutting mandate on technology. The CSTD has been proactively building alliances with other actors of the international system. Specifically, the results of the CSTD's work have been presented to the high-level political forum, the Second Committee of the General Assembly, the ECOSOC Integration and Management segments, the first and new ECOSOC Coordination segment, the 2021 STI Forum of the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, and the ITU Council Working Group on WSIS and the SDGs. The CSTD also provides an excellent opportunity to deliberate on important outcomes and to forge partnerships in key areas for STI action in support of the achievement of the SDGs. The Commission continues to serve its member states through thick and thin, as we have seen over the past 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to thank all member states and international organizations for providing inputs to the priority themes on the one hand, and the WSIC review on the other, as well as their interventions during last November's intersessional panel. They have greatly helped the preparation of the respective Secretary General's reports. This commission indeed serves as an excellent mechanism for sharing experiences and lessons learned to enable STI policies to be advanced for sustainable development. I look forward to your active engagement in the deliberations for a productive and fruitful annual session. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, it is my great pleasure to invite the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Mrs. Rebeca Grynspan, to make her opening remarks. Mrs. Grynspan, you have the floor.
Hello, do you hear me well?
مرحبا، هل تسمعونني جيدا؟
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be with you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Chair. Thank you very much. Welcome to the 25th annual session of the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development. Since this is the first time I address the Commission as Secretary General of UNCTAD, allow me to emphasize how proud we are to service the CSTD, the UN home for deliberation, consensus building, and partnering around science, technology, and innovation for development. Ladies and gentlemen, for the third time in 2 years, this commission meets as dramatic events of historic proportions threaten to derail progress towards the achievement of the 2030 agenda. For that reason, as a body dedicated to mobilizing knowledge for development and for the realization of the aspirations of the UN, it is important for us to remember that it is our duty to learn and change with every crisis. I would like to invite you today to take advantage of those opportunities to realize what science, technology, and innovation can do for the world when we act together, and how much is lost when we lose our sense of common purpose. Addressing the 2020 World Economic Forum last January, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, pointed out that, and I quote, global solidarity is missing in action, end of quote. He further argued that the last few years had demonstrated, I quote again, a simple but brutal truth. If we leave anyone behind, in the end, we leave everybody behind. The leave no one behind principle offers a clear and persuasive incentive for harnessing science, technology, and innovation, and in particular, new and emerging technologies for sustainable development. The ongoing pandemic has exacerbated data-related market power imbalances as global digital corporations have enormously benefited from accelerated digitalization needs, while the rest of the world is struggling to recover from the resulting economic crisis. In fact, the UNCTAD Digital Economy Report 2021 confirms that the growing interconnections resulting from progress in digital technologies globally have led to a new form of international economic interdependence and an increasing existing inequalities. Another major UNCTAD knowledge product, the Technology and Innovation Report in 2021, has also noted that frontier technologies already represent 350 billion worth of markets that could grow to 3.2 trillion by 2025. Yet, many developing countries are still too far from being ready to use, adopt, and adapt to the ongoing technological revolution, resulting in dangerous consequences for the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, the principle of solidarity frames much of our work at UNCTAD. STI represents perhaps the field in which international cooperation and collaboration could be most profoundly effective to materialize the principle of solidarity through a few key actions, such as scaling up resources and developing, I have a problem here, scaling up resources and developing appropriate policy space. Technology is central to UNCTAD's work to build a global economy that is fair, inclusive, and sustainable. We support developing countries as they align their STI goals with national development objectives and the SDGs, formulate coherent policies, and design appropriate policy instruments. The CSTD has inspired some important initiatives in that regard, such as our STI policy reviews or the recently launched technology assessment project in Africa. In other cases, we have provided the framework for different norms of North-South and South-South cooperation. Focusing our activities to date on such goal-directed and concrete cooperation programs helped us accumulate considerable knowledge about what it takes to build successful science, technology, and innovation cooperation, one that embraces countries at all stages of technological development. We have also learned what today's challenges require, building a more ambitious framework for international science, technology, and innovation collaboration. We are all aware of the severe and sweeping global challenges that confront us on many fronts: inequality, disease, climate change, environmental degradation, and now war. They affect the life of all in many different ways and are far too complex for any single country or organization to deal with them alone. It is important to underline one critical point. These global challenges cannot be addressed effectively just through traditional technical cooperation instruments. There is an urgent need to define and shape new instruments that are based on collaborative solutions that emerge when all members of the global community are learning together and from each other through practical action on the same global challenges. The work of the CSTD and UNCTAD research have demonstrated how, in parallel with the emergence of extraordinary possibilities to address human needs, accelerated technological change risks creating broad technological divide among people and countries, among other unintended consequences of technological disruption. Science and technology have become the object of intense geostrategic competition. Billions are invested in frontier technologies in a race to, I quote, leave everyone else behind instead of what we want to do, that is to leave no one behind. So the competition wants to leave everybody else behind. It is as though gains in knowledge were seen as a zero-sum game, rather than the collective enterprise bringing progress for all. That is the true nature of science, technology, and innovation. The UN has a fundamental duty to help reverse the situation. We need to make sure that the values of international solidarity and collaboration guide science, technology, and innovation development so that the formidable opportunities that are at our reach materialize for all. I am calling for a concerted international effort to build technological capabilities and support all forms of innovation in developing economies. Developing countries should receive international support to build their domestic capabilities and create an enabling environment necessary for science, technology, and innovation to deliver. A clear example is given by one of the priority themes that you will be discussing this week, Industry 4.0 for inclusive development. The deployment of Industry 4.0 can increase productivity and improve sustainability through a smaller carbon print of manufacturing and reduce waste. However, for developing countries to reap these benefits, international collaboration will be essential in several directions. And let me very quickly go through several of them. First, sharing knowledge and information and facilitating participation of developing countries in research networks. Second, supporting the design of Industry 4.0 strategies and policies. Third, helping build capacity among the actors in the innovation system. Fifth, developing new partnerships, models for technology transfer. 6, addressing systems and market failures. And finally, working on relevant legal frameworks, guidelines, norms, and standards. The CSTD is the ideal forum to start the conversation that will lead to actions in these directions. As the world's leading advocate for STI for development, the CSTD should contribute to the effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda by delivering state-of-the-art evidence-based guidance and forging practical science, technology, and innovation collaborations. With this in mind, I would like to conclude my remarks with an invitation to all the STD stakeholders to rise to the occasion and commit to advance science, technology, innovation partnerships for sustainable development through creative, critical thinking, and mutual learning that leverages the potential of North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation. Explore bespoke, collaborative solutions to global challenges through frontier technologies that are respectful of shared ethical and safety standards, and promote an inclusive debate on all aspects of technological development that considers the consequences for all people and communities, including the most vulnerable among them. I trust your next 5 days of work will deliver some first practical steps in this direction. I really thank you all for your attention, for your participation, and for your contribution to the success of this event. Thank you very much, Chair.
نشكر الأمين العام على بيانها.
Thank you very much.
أدعو الآن ضيوفنا
Thank the Secretary General for her statement. And I will now give the floor to our distinguished guests to make their statements. I will begin with His Excellency Mr. Collen Vixen Kelapile, President of the Economic and Social Council, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Botswana to the United Nations in New York, to make his address. This is a pre-recorded video. You have the floor, Excellency.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to address the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development, CSTD, a critical component of the broad network of ECOSOC subsidiary bodies. The Commission is once again meeting against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, with the use of science, technology, and innovation, particularly frontier technologies in developing vaccines and medicines, some parts of the world are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Nevertheless, unequal access to the vaccines will continue to slow our recovery, which will remain fragile until the vaccines are equitably made available across the globe. By now, the critical role of STI in making progress on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is universally acknowledged. This recognition has been vividly brought to light in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where STI solutions have been deployed to fortify the resilience of communities worldwide. In this context, the CSTD has a significant contribution to make. As the United Nations torchbearer and focal point for STI for development, the Commission provides a unique platform for countries to work together on an international agenda and to build partnerships around it to harness STI to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The outcome of your deliberations today and in the following days on Industry 4.0 for inclusive development on the role of STI for sustainable and urban development in a post-COVID-19 world, and on the review of the World Summit on Information Society. Follow-up progress will add value to inform the high-level political forum on sustainable development, the HLPF. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, human development in recent decades has been accompanied by rapid changes in technology and an increasing proliferation of digitalized services and devices. The pace of change seems likely to accelerate because of frontier technologies. These technologies have enormous potential for improving people's lives and facilitating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. But most of these technologies remain out of reach for the poor. This is where multi-stakeholder partnerships have a key role to play, including social media platforms. All of humanity must have equal access to ICT opportunities the world over, especially when the means to do so are available. I should also note that CSTD offers member states a platform to explore ways of strengthening the science policy interface at the national and global levels and better coordinate STI-focused international cooperation, including digital cooperation in the spirit of multilateralism. It also plays a bridge-building role to get countries to support each other in building national STI capacity. One of the most critical lessons we are learning during the ongoing pandemic is that global solidarity, multilateralism, and cooperation are indeed our greatest assets. When we work together, our ability to overcome hardship is unparalleled. An example is the recent global scientific collaboration leading to the amazingly rapid development of effective coronavirus vaccines. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me underscore that the pandemic has shown us that we no longer can work continuously on a business as usual manner. We need to change the way we live, produce, consume, and interact with each other and with nature. We need to mobilize science and technology for the shared benefit and harness our best and boldest ideas to develop innovative solutions to advance the SDGs and bridge inequalities between and within countries. In this regard, we need to rekindle a true spirit of multilateralism and international cooperation and engage in genuine partnerships among all stakeholders. The CSTD should be fully utilized in this effort. Let me close by commending the outstanding work of the Commission over the years, not only for its substantive contributions, but also for its systematic effort to collaborate with other actors in the ECOSOC system and in the UN family at large. I wish you a successful session, fruitful discussions, and look forward to receiving the outcomes of your deliberations. I thank you.
أشكر السفير كيلابايل على بيانه.
I thank His Excellency, the Ambassador of Botswana, for his statement, Ambassador Kelapile.
يسعدني الآن أن أدعو السيد مالكم جونسون.
I now have the pleasure to invite Mr. Malcolm Johnson, the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU, to address the Commission. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to address CSTD. I'd like to start by informing you that the ITU, as the UN specialized agency for ICTs, deplores the widespread destruction of critical infrastructure, failure of telecom services, and mobile phone outages that have occurred across Ukraine since the beginning of the war. The ITU Council, currently in session, has adopted a resolution on assistance and support to Ukraine for rebuilding their telecommunications sector. As the war goes on, ITU echoes United Nations Secretary General's call for the conflict to stop and reaffirms the importance of telecommunications and ICTs for peace and development. Turning to the work of the Commission, I commend UNCTAD's Secretary General's report entitled Industry 4.0 for Inclusive Development and the theme Science, Technology and Innovation for Sustainable Urban Development in a Post-Pandemic World. Both of these themes are synonymous with advances in emerging digital technologies such as 5G, AI, and the Internet of Things, fields where ITU's role is central in terms of standards and spectrum. In this, as in everything else, ITU's objective is to ensure that all countries can benefit from this new wave of technology, and no one is left behind. As the report points out, however, most developing countries are not ready to use the technology. Changing this will require forging and strengthening partnerships and developing international collaboration. And this is the essence of the WSIS process. During ITU Council meeting, the Council reiterated its support for ITU's leading role in the WSIS process and highlighted the importance of the WSIS action lines in advancing the SDGs. The Council appreciated the Secretary General's suggested roadmap on the 20-year review of the WSIS beyond 2025. We were asked to further develop it for consideration at the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference starting in September. We've shared the document with the CSTD Secretariat, and we look forward to working in close collaboration with CSTD in the WSIS review process and in the discussions in the UN group on the Information Society, UNGIS. I take this opportunity to encourage everyone, everywhere, to participate in this year's WSIS Forum, which was launched 2 weeks ago virtually, and which will culminate in a final week to be held physically in Geneva from the 30th of May to the 3rd of June. This year is an important year for ITU. We have 3 major conferences taking place in the span of just a few months. In addition to the Plenipotentiary Conference in September, we had the World Telecommunications Standards Assembly earlier this month, and that highlighted how vital digital technologies are to creating a more prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive future for all. And then in June, we have the World Telecommunication Development Conference, which will be held in Kigali, Rwanda. ICTs are essential to social, economic, sustainable development, and ITU is in the business to collaborate with everyone to make sure we achieve this. We need to make every effort to continue to align the WSIS process with the SDGs and fulfill the vision outlined by the WSIS almost 20 years ago of an information society where everyone, everywhere can benefit from the opportunities that ICTs can offer. We can only achieve this by working closer together at the national, regional, and international level. Cooperation, coordination, and collaboration are the 3 essential words. I wish you a very successful session. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
أشكر نائب الأمين العام لاتحاد دولة الاتصالات على بيانه.
I thank the Deputy Secretary General of the ITU for his statement.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen,
الآن إلى البند الأول.
we will now turn our attention
أدعو اللجنة الآن إلى
to
النظر في
agenda
كيفية
item
وضع
1.
وتنظيم
And under that heading, I invite the Commission to consider the provisional agenda and organization of work.
أدعوكم أولا للانتقال لجدول الأعمال المؤقت الوارد في الوثيقة
I first invite you to turn to the provisional agenda, which you will find contained in document E/CN.16/2022/1. Said provisional agenda is available in all 6 United Nations languages. The provisional agenda for the 25th session of the Commission were approved by ECOSOC, as was all related documentation, and said approval is contained in the ECOSOC's decision 2021/258, dated the 22nd of July, 2021. May I take it that the Commission wishes to adopt the provisional agenda? I hear no objection. It is so decided.
وفقا لبرنامجنا اليوم سنواصل اجتماعنا في إطار المائدة المستديرة.
As per our program today, we will continue the meeting with the high-level roundtable on the role of science, technology, and innovation in building back better from the coronavirus disease while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The roundtable will be moderated by Mr. Genaro Rodríguez Martínez, Vice Chair of the Commission.
Distinguidos delegados, señoras y señores.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we shall now begin with part 2 of today's meeting, the high-level round table on the role of science, technology, and innovation in building back better from the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This roundtable furnishes us with an opportunity for political leaders and decision makers to set out their priorities to ensure that science, technology, and innovation can be fully harnessed and woven into strategies for development against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic and the decade of actions and successes for sustainable development. This roundtable will also provide us with a golden opportunity to ensure that those responsible for policy making at the highest level will be able to share experience, will be able to share lessons learned, and also detail good practices, and also share with the audience the challenges with which they are confronted at the national, regional, and international level, as well as pool information on potential solutions to overcome said challenges. The outcome of the roundtable will take the guise of a summary drafted under the authority of the chair, a summary that will be submitted to the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development under the auspices of the Council for the consideration of the HLPF and ECOSOC. The key points which we shall address during today's roundtable are as follows. Firstly, how can science, technology, and innovation contribute to building back better from the crisis triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, while simultaneously ensuring that we can tap the potential of these tools to address vulnerabilities and inequalities that are systemic and indeed were systemic prior to the pandemic, but which have been thrown into stark relief by the emergence of the pandemic. The second point we will consider is what actions can science, technology, and innovation and the practitioners thereof and the international community take in order to strengthen global cooperation in the fields of science, technology, and innovation, particularly in the field of science, technology, and innovation, and how this can be harnessed to mitigate the impact of COVID-19, to build back better therefrom, and to ensure rapid progress as we emerge from COVID-19 towards the full achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular the SDGs pertaining to high quality education, as well as gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goal on partnerships for achieving said goals. The third question that we will have to grapple with is how can the international community promote and encourage public participation and promote and foster innovative partnerships with the private sector in particular in order to harness the full potential of science, technology, and innovation to accelerate progress towards the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as ensuring that we build back better from COVID-19. The fourth issue we will consider at this roundtable is how can the international community pursue pledges and commitments to unleash the necessary resources to boost the technological capacities of developing countries in order to better position themselves to build back better and to strengthen their resilience and their ability to withstand future shocks and crises. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we shall proceed to the ministerial debate. It is my great pleasure to invite the following individuals to take the floor to deliver their statements from the podium when in the room. And I'll begin by giving the floor to His Excellency, Dr. Douglas Lachelementelli, who is the Minister for Tertiary Education, Research and Science and Technology of Botswana.
شكرا نائب الرئيس. أعتقد أن معالي الوزير من بوتسوانا سيتحدث إلينا يوم الغد.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that the Minister of Botswana will be speaking tomorrow, so we will move on to the next speaker instead. Microphone, please, for the speaker. If that is the case, Chair, and given that the Minister for Tertiary Education, Research, Science and Technology of Botswana is not with us today, we shall move straight on and we will have the honor of hearing from His Excellency, Dr. Franklin Garcia Fermin, who is the Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology of the Dominican Republic. Your Excellency, Dr. Franklin Garcia Fermin, you have the floor. Thank you very much indeed. Distinguished members of the Commission of Science and Technology for Development, distinguished ministers representing those countries who are participating in the CSTD, distinguished members of the Bureau, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD, Vice Minister for Science and Technology of the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology of the Dominican Republic, Dr. Genaro Rodríguez Martínez, Moderator of this high-level roundtable, ladies and gentlemen. In my capacity as the Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology of the Dominican Republic, it is a great honor for me to participate at this 25th session that is being held in Geneva, with both in-person and remote participation, and which will run from today, Monday, the 28th of March, until Friday, the 1st of April, 2022. At the outset, I think it would be useful to put on the table for consideration the following thought. And I would very much welcome the impact and reflection from the various eminent personalities from the world of science and academia, as well as those representing the private, civilian and governmental spheres who are with us today. I look forward to interaction with you and to your thoughts on what I have to share. The pandemic and now the post-pandemic period have taught us many lessons. Nonetheless, currently, we are witnessing the conflagration in Europe triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that is the stark backdrop or relief to all of our discussions and efforts. And against that backdrop, I would ask the participants in this conference, particularly the scientists and economists who are with us, who will address key and important as well as timely topics on opportunities and challenges represented by scientific progress in terms of sustainability. I would ask whether their thoughts and their predictions for the future have changed in light of the recent outbreak of conflict. Because every day we wake up to a different world, moving faster than a 5G network. Change is very rapid. And I think that's why it's so important that the topics and issues discussed by the CSTD as they pertain to science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development will focus indeed on the COVID-19 post-pandemic recovery, but do so by being realistic and making sure that we pursue sustainable change and making sure that the Revolution 4.0 is kept on track. And to see what impact the war might have thereon. This commission will be a waypoint on the way to the World Summit on the Information Society. And the participation of everyone here is vital given the complexity of the world and the cyber world in which we find ourselves. And so I very much look forward to what everyone has to say. Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of this important event. I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Franklin Garcia Fermin, the Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology of the Dominican Republic, for what was a very useful statement with much food for thought. I now proceed to give the floor to Dr. Hitendra Sid, the distinguished Minister of State for Science and Technology and Earth Sciences of India.
His Excellency Mr. Mansoor Qureshi, Chair of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, Her Excellency Ms. Rebeca Grynspan, Secretary General UNCTAD, my fellow distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I present myself before you on behalf of India and on behalf of the Government of India led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And I must say it's an honor to join this high-level roundtable at the 25th session of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development on a topic as timely and as pertinent as leveraging science and technology to build back better and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. COVID-19, as all of us know, came on the eve of Decade of Action 2020-2030 and has undoubtedly disrupted decades of developmental progress on more than one front. It has resulted in the most damaging humanitarian and economic crisis since the Second World War, especially for the more vulnerable nations. The pandemic has diminished the funds available to achieve Agenda 2030 in this decade of action and has diverted them to more pressing humanitarian requirements. Estimates suggest that the annual SDG financing gap could increase by as much as 70% from the pre-COVID level to US dollars 4.2 trillion. The challenge, therefore, is to ensure that momentum towards Agenda 2030 that seeks to attain the Sustainable Development Goals is not lost as the world, recovers from the pandemic. The challenges which face us now, ladies and gentlemen, make it clear that we need a whole of society approach. Whole of society approach in both building back better from the pandemic and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We need a robust global and national SDH framework which will make it easier for the state, the civil society, the private players, including the corporate world, to invest and contribute in this collective effort. This will undoubtedly involve a mechanism to be put in place for de-risking so that the capital can be mobilized, since the capital market will have to play a key role. While public finance will no doubt continue to be an important vehicle for the SDGs, innovative financing will have an important role to ensure that the decade of action is truly where the action is. India has been driving an array of sustainable development goal initiatives such as the National Health Insurance Scheme, National Nutrition Mission, and Clean India Mission. Programs are aimed at universal access to housing, sanitation, quality education, health protection, and clean energy, which will improve quality of life among the most vulnerable. To give a few examples, since the advent of 2030 agenda, we have expanded access to clean cooking fuel to over 85 million households in need, built over 110 million toilets in rural areas to improve sanitation, and added over 420 million bank accounts for the unbanked, the majority of them being women. Our food security programs are successfully addressing the issues of malnourishment among children and women. And to cope up with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, we have announced food security scheme providing food rations for 800 million people and cash transfers to 400 million. And other such measures directly aimed at alleviating the misery of the people. We have also taken ambitious commitments under the Paris Agreement for Climate Action, which the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi enunciated as Panchavarit, 5 steadfast commitments, including our commitment to reduce carbon intensity of our economy by more than 45% by 2030 and to achieve the net zero by 2070. In other words, India is walking the talk as far as the Sustainable Development Goals are concerned. These commitments are built on leveraging science and technology to achieve a more inclusive and development-oriented future for our cities. I give you a few examples of how technology has become our best tool in achieving these goals. For example, to enhance the data collection on national and local level, we have developed SDG India Index and Dashboard, using a globally accepted methodology after extensive consultations with civil society. We have charted out an STI for SDG roadmaps in India, which would focus on 4 SDGs, that is SDG 2, namely agriculture and nutrition, SDG 3, namely health and well-being, SDG 6, water and sanitation, and SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. India is tapping into low-carbon sunrise sectors, new technology frontiers such as green hydrogen, new business models such as digitalized services and EV charging, new construction materials like low-carbon cement and recycled plastic, as well as promoting circular economy and new practices for sustainable agriculture and food system. We have some of the largest, fastest growing programs for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. India ranks 4th in terms of the installed renewable energy, installed wind energy capacity, and 5th in solar, an increase of 13 times in the last 6 years under Prime Minister Modi. Share of non-fossil sources in India's installed capacity of electricity has grown to more than 38%, that is 38%. We would like to visualize ourselves as an inspiration for clean energy transition across the world. Transfer of green technologies and know-how is key to enhancing adaptation and mitigation measures. Global action on climate change is contingent on the delivery of finance. The commitment of the goal of $100 billion per year by 2020 committed by developed countries has not yet been met. However, the challenges lie in the access to viable cutting-edge technologies at affordable costs. Technological innovations are now impacting every facet of human life, be it the health, the livelihood, the education, transport, or entertainment. Apart from enhancing inclusion, transparency, and efficiency in services provided by the government, technology can be used also to shape a digital public goods ecosystem that enables private companies and startups to innovate the grassroots. Being a global leader in IT and software, ladies and gentlemen, through transformative policies under Digital India program, India, under Prime Minister Modi, has been successful in delivering people-centric solutions. India now has over 1 billion bank accounts, including more than 300 million Jan Dhan bank accounts for citizens left out earlier. 1.25 billion persons with Aadhaar, a unique national digital identity, and more than 1.2 billion mobile subscribers. The combination of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, commonly known as JAM, the JAM Trinity, has transformed access to government service and taken social benefits to more than 1 billion persons in India, including those who are residing in the remotest of the remotest locations. Through these public digital platforms, ladies and gentlemen, India has conclusively demonstrated the effectiveness of digital public goods, that the DPG is a shared national resource. During the pandemic, we have seen how science and technology have had a direct, tangible impact on lives, right from developing vaccine to delivering them. Made in India vaccine have enabled us to run one of the world's largest vaccination programs, under which we have administered 1.8 billion doses of the COVID-19 vaccine till date, while supplying 167 million COVID doses to the other developing countries. COVID app developed in India, which is an open platform for management, registration, appointment, scheduling, managing vaccination and certification, has helped to integrate the entire gamut of services related to COVID-19 vaccination drive. By enabling effective monitoring of utilization and coverage of vaccination, COVID has also helped us reduce wastage and allocate our resources in an optimal manner. Digital vaccination certificates are instantly available to the citizens. Under the South-South cooperation, India has been sharing its experiences with developed partners around the world. Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi has already announced India's readiness to make COVID platform available globally for the interested countries. Strengthen technological cooperation between member states through transfer of technology and capacity building is, I must say, the key to deliver on the promises of sustainable development. I am certain that today's dialogue will help motivate us and guide us to remain committed in our task of making a resilient recovery from COVID-19 pandemic and achieve the Agenda 2030. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and namaste.
I wish to thank His Excellency Dr. Jitendra Singh for his statement. The next speaker is Her Excellency Ms. Anita Muisniesi, the Minister of Education and Science of the Republic of Latvia.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to address you on the occasion of opening of the 25th annual session of the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development. Today, more than ever, the world needs our solidarity and concerned action. It was the first lesson we learned from the COVID crisis. It became even more apparent after we saw a disaster, the suffering and death of Ukrainian people, including many children, caused by Russia's military invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign and democratic country, and we stand united in solidarity with people of Ukraine who are bravely defending their country and freedom. I recall the joint statement of 3 education and science ministers of Baltic states of 28th of February strongly condemning Russia's invasion in Ukraine, calling on the EU ministers responsible for education and science to join us in our commitment to provide support and the necessary assistance for sovereign state of Ukraine. As a matter of urgency, the Parliament of Latvia has adopted a law on support of Ukrainian people, which provides the legal basis for fast and efficient national support measures. We have established a single point of information for refugees, which ensures coordination and guidance. Young Latvian researchers have launched online coordination platform Science for Ukraine, which now has become a global platform used both in EU and worldwide, collecting and disseminating information about support opportunities at universities, national and international level for graduate students and researchers directly affiliated to an academic institution in Ukraine. As a ministry responsible for education and science, we have prepared a national support package for Ukrainian students, researchers, and academic staff, including scholarships for students and researchers. There is an overwhelming support from our universities, offering study places for students and expressing solidarity and compassion. We received an immediate answer from Latvian higher educational institutions and research organizations who are willing to admit more than 1,000 Ukrainian students, providing more than 1,200 dormitory rooms and ensuring working conditions for more than 130 researchers and academics, of course. People of Latvia continue to donate money for Ukraine, and donations have already reached 6 million euros. Times are turbulent, but neither natural disasters, climate change, nor illnesses are stepping back. We should carry on, but we cannot forget about global tasks of education and research. And it is crucial to use all the knowledge we have gained and reach for growth and success.
I thank Ms. Anita Muizniece for her statement. I give the floor next to Sibli Faras, who's the Federal Minister for Science and Technology of Pakistan.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure to join this round table. I would like to commend the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development for organizing this session on a very special theme. This meeting comes at a time when the world is gradually recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. In many ways, this recovery owes a great deal to science, technology, and innovation. And evidence is before us, from rapid development of personal protection equipment to testing kits, and from medicines to vaccines. We saw innovation at the center of saving lives. Excellencies, where science, technology, and innovation largely succeeded in mitigating one of the most pressing global public health policy challenge of our times, its transformational role in accelerating progress towards sustainable development goals remains modest. The economic contraction, disruption caused to international trade, and reduced FDI inflows during the pandemic have increased debt burdens and reduced fiscal space for developing countries. As a result, the pandemic has deepened social and economic inequalities among and within countries. Developing countries have been hit the hardest. More than 150 million people have fallen back into extreme poverty, and more than 250 million jobs have been lost. Cumulatively, these developments have not only eroded previous development gains, they also slowed progress towards achievement of sustainable development goals. Systemic imbalances in the global economic and financial systems are now more evident than ever before. There is insufficiency of debt relief, but abundance of vaccine inequity. Even as use of digital technologies became more pervasive overall, gaps in digital connectivity also became more visible during the pandemic. This state of affairs necessitates a big push to develop and disseminate the necessary STI tools, policy advice, and technical know-how to those lagging behind. Excellencies, states, enterprises, and entrepreneurs across the world have helped accelerate the pace and volume of several technological applications and innovations that underpin economic activities. Teleworking, virtual meetings, video conferencing, and distant learning drive have in many ways changed the world of work. Barely a year after the World Health Organization announced the onset of COVID-19, several highly effective vaccines became available. More than 1.5 billion vaccine doses have already been administered as of today. This is a classic example of bringing together scientific knowledge to fight a global challenge. Going forward, it is essential to share technology freely across national and disciplinary boundaries and between the public and private sectors so that everyone, everywhere can benefit from it. Excellencies, technologies should not perpetuate inequalities. They should instead be deployed to reduce them in support of social protection, healthcare, and learning. Harnessing technologies for these people, for these public goods, is essential to build resilience and preparedness for any pandemic in the future. In Pakistan, we are according high priority to both science, technology, innovation, and healthcare system within the budgetary and financial means available. We have deployed ICT tools to determine eligibility criteria for fully subsidized health insurance cards. We also established a technology-centered national command and operations centers to coordinate federal, provincial, and district level monitoring, information, and data sharing and awareness purposes. We mobilized and harnessed our research and development institutions to manufacture personal protective equipment, sanitizers, testing kits, and ventilators. We were able to produce these materials in a short time at a scale and competitive pricing. We are investing in biomedical research and development. We have recently established a medical devices and development center at National University of Science and Technology with a cost of rupees 331 million. We have also formulated a new science, technology, and innovation policy this year. A key policy goal is to establish smart cities in phase-wise manner. The policy also recognizes the importance of ICT-based services such as internet for societal development in the era of Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Ministry of Science and Technology is leading national efforts to mobilize research organizations, universities, and industries, and creating conditions for these stakeholders to synergize and collaborate, including in the area of health. To build forward better through enhanced and smart use of science, technology, and innovation, let me suggest 5 points. First, a robust global development financing framework is essential to enable and accelerate investments in STI and health care sector. This requires, inter alia, fairer international tax, trading, and investment regimes for developing countries as a means to improve their fiscal space and to enable them to achieve progress in the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Second, enhanced international collaboration in scientific research, capacity building, and technology transfer is vital to reduce the existing digital divide. Frontier technologies such as big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, gene editing, telemedicine, and medical robotics hold immense potential to shape the world in post-COVID era. Third, equitable and affordable access to life-saving medicines and vaccines to everyone, everywhere remains imperative. This requires urgent removal of undue restrictions on intellectual property rights and early waiver of patents on COVID-19 patents to accelerate production of vaccines and medicines. Fourth, increase in STI-related official development assistance to developing countries is necessary. STI-related ODA to developing countries has stagnated over the last decade. In 2010, it was $4.7 billion compared with $4 billion in 2017. Fifth, North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation and partnerships on STI are essential. The Commission on Science and Technology should continue building partnerships and enhance its interface with universities, innovation incubators, and private sector entities to promote breakthrough innovations and facilitate two-way exchange of real-time information and policy insights. Finally, I wish to commend the excellent work of the Commission. We look forward to contributing and benefiting from its work. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank Mr. Siblifara for his statement, and I give the floor next to His Excellency Mr. Fortunato T. de la Peña, Minister for Science and Technology of the Philippines.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, only 2 years ago, the world was struck with the unprecedented COVID-19 outbreak. Everything was uncertain, but through science, experts from around the world were able to rapidly study the virus, understand its behavior, produce vaccines, and develop policies and programs that address the short to long-term impact of the pandemic. We have harnessed science, technology, and innovation to respond and recover. Unfortunately, the pandemic also exacerbated the inequalities and expose the vulnerabilities in our systems. Mr. Chair, the Philippines builds on research and development and facilities that cater to the needs of society. The country's Department of Science and Technology is at the forefront in the legislation of the Virology and Vaccine Institute of the Philippines, or BIP, to ensure vaccine security in the country and in the development of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. The Philippines gives value in supporting various institutions and startups that develop beneficial technologies and life-saving equipment. Universities and medical centers are being strengthened by building relevant R&D centers across the country through the department's niche centers in the regions for R&D or NICER program. To revitalize the economy, governments may help in rebuilding the market by assisting micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs. In the field of science, technology, and innovation, the department continuously helps the local MSMEs to improve their competitiveness through its Small Enterprise Technology Upgrading Program in terms of technology upgrading, human capital development, and strengthening of innovation capability. It is high time to make technologies more available and accessible to everyone through resilient infrastructure and inclusive policies and programs. Excellencies, the Philippines believes that achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and recovering from the pandemic requires a whole-of-nation approach. To move forward, the international community must provide an enabling environment for technology-based enterprises to flourish. There must be a safe space for collaboration among countries with diverse stakeholders, and the Commission on Science and Technology for Development is one such platform. Excellencies, foresight, strong partnerships, and a just framework will safeguard us from future crises. To ensure that no one will be left behind, we must stand by each other with the aim of building back better. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Fortunato de la Peña for his statements, and I next give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Anjali Chang Orantes, the National Secretary for Science and Technology of Guatemala.
شكرا السيد جناريرو. أعتقد أن الآنسة أنا غير موجودة ويمكن الانتقال إلى جلسة النقاش المفتوح.
It seems that Ms. Orantes is not present, and as a result, we could begin our dialogue.
شكرا. أعطي الكلمة الآن للآنسة.
Thank you.
الرئيس التنفيذي.
I will now give the floor
وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية.
to Ms. Allison, the Foreign Ministry representative of the US.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Chair. Ministers, distinguished delegates, and colleagues, the United States asks for the floor today to make a statement about the future of science, technology, and innovation for development in these challenging times, and to help set the tone for the rest of the week. I would first like to commend the chair and organizers for the outstanding agenda and thank the ministers who just spoke. I am encouraged by our collective acknowledgement that science, technology, and innovation are essential for economic and social development, in addition to their vast impact on humanitarian affairs, and that we are using this forum for strategic planning, sharing lessons learned and best practices, and providing foresight about critical trends. The United States looks forward to the in-depth and expert-led discussions throughout the week. As we launch the week-long series of engagements on science, technology, and innovation for development, let us reflect on how far we have come in utilizing science and technology in promoting development, democracy, human rights, and peace and security. Science, technology, and innovation are about the future, but I would be remiss not to talk about the realities that threaten to pull us all back toward a darker past. Today, we are at an inflection point in history for the renewal of democracy as it is being tested by the crisis in Europe. Russia's unlawful and unprovoked war in Ukraine is an affront to the principles we seek to affirm, our work to promote closer ties, our belief in collaboration across the boundaries of nations, religion, ethnicity, and creed, and our efforts to advance international science, technology, and innovation for development. Let me be clear. Russia's war in Ukraine, which has been facilitated by Belarus, strikes at the heart of the ideals and values of the United Nations. This should be the venue where we bridge the digital divides and push the curve of discovery. Russia's war of choice in Ukraine is fundamentally antithetical to the values and principles of science upheld by many countries. We are committed to settling disagreements through open and reasoned discussion. We value robust debate and collaboration, and we adhere to standards of conduct that foster mutual understanding and respect. When we disagree, we state our reasons, we document, we inquire, we question, we test, we update and revise. We use the methods of science to forge a more durable, sustainable, and enlightened peace. Instead of using their many talents for the benefit of society, many Ukrainian scientists, engineers, students, educators are compelled to take up arms to defend their homeland against Russian forces. This war has impacted more than just Ukrainian citizens. Before the Russian invasion, Ukraine hosted more than 70,000 international students, predominantly from Africa and South Asia, most of whom have been forced to flee into neighboring countries. These individuals crossed borders and traveled to Ukraine to study, learn, and experiment, only to have their dreams shattered by the invading force. Those are the stakes, and we must all rise to the moment. Together with our allies and partners, the United States is taking action to promote accountability for the Russian and Belarusian governments, and we are working with our scientific societies to identify solutions that will provide Ukrainian scientists and international students the support they need. The United States believes that CSTD members must act with renewed focus to protect the values and principles enshrined in the UN Charter, the very same democratic values that create the conditions for science, technology, and innovation to flourish, and in turn benefit all people. We should keep this at the center of our discussions this week. The United States believes in the Commission, and we will redouble our efforts to promote the good of science, technology, and innovation for development in this forum. In closing, our goal is simple: to have shared and strong networks of countries, companies, and universities connected by shared values and a shared commitment to conduct science, to design and deploy technology for the benefit of all people, to strengthen open and interoperable systems, and to encourage freedom of thought and expression, which is at the heart of science, technology, and innovation. Together, we can shape the global evolution of science and technology in a manner consistent with these values. Thank you for the time, Vice Chair. The United States yields the floor.
شكرا لك سيد رودريغيز وجميع أصحاب المعالي والسعادة.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that intervention. And my thanks also go to Mr. Rodríguez and all those who took the floor.
مع العقول العظيمة. سيدير هذا الحدث السيدة إيموجين فلوكس مراسلة BBC في جنيف. لدينا 4 متحدثين بارزين معنا.
At this stage, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Imogen Fuchs, who is the BBC Geneva correspondent. She will moderate our special event, A Conversation with Great Minds. We have with us for that conversation Mr. Yoshua Bengio, full professor at University de Montréal of Canada, Ms. Shoshana Zuboff, the Charles Edward Wilson Professor Emerita of the Harvard Business School of the United States, Mr. Darren Asemoyu, who is Institute Professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at the United States. And also speaking at this special event will be Ms. Carlota Perez, Honorary Professor, University College London of the United Kingdom. Ms. Fuchs, I hand the moderation over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, hello, thank you for your patience. Welcome to what I think is going to be a fascinating conversation with great minds. I'm Imogen Fuchs, I'm your moderator for this special event. As you've perhaps expected, like every year, we've invited some amazing scholars and thinkers to share their views with you, the UN member states, on current topics being discussed here at CSTD. On our panel today, as you heard, we have 4 very distinguished scholars. They each focus on a different aspect of technological change and its all-important economic impact. So for the next hour, it's a real honor and pleasure to be able to tap into the great minds of Professor Yoshua Bengio, Professor Shoshana Zuboff, Professor Darren Achemoyu, and Professor Carlota Perez. Now, each of them will present us with basic concepts and key results of their latest research in the areas of science, technology, innovation, and socioeconomic development. And from there, we won't forget you. In the last 15 minutes, our Great Minds conversation is open to you in the audience too to ask questions. Thank you very much. We are going to start with Professor Yoshua Bengio. He will start this session, and he's going to provide us with his perspective on the opportunities and challenges of AI, artificial intelligence. Just a few words about him. Yoshua Bengio is a full professor at the Department of Computer Science and Operations Research at the University of Montreal. He's also the founder and scientific director of Mila and the scientific director of Evado. He's considered one of the world's leaders in AI and deep learning. And he's the recipient of the 2018 AM Turing Award with Jeff Hinton and Yan Li-kun. That's also known as the Nobel Prize of Computing. In 2022, he was elevated to the rank of Knight of the Legion of Honor by the French Republic. Professor Bengio, my first question, or our first question to you, since your research focuses, among others, on the opportunities and benefits, but also the ethical challenges and socioeconomic risks of artificial intelligence and machine learning, there are so many concerns, as we know, about the misuse of AI. What are the reasons we should collectively invest in it?
Thank you for asking this question. Indeed, for a number of years, I've been working on the applications of AI in areas that matter for SDGs and what we call AI for social good. And there's a lot of research that's going on to apply AI in these areas, ranging from healthcare, climate change, education, and so on. So AI-driven innovation can help us deal with some of those major challenges of our time. In the last couple of years, I've been involved at the Global Partnership on AI, or GPAI, co-chairing a committee on responsible AI. And just the last few months, we have put out a report entitled Climate Change and AI that explains the many ways in which AI can be used to help mitigate climate change. For example, to make better use of renewable resources through forecasting and automated energy resource allocation, through the design of better materials, better monitoring of changes in the climate and biodiversity, and many more aspects. I've also headed a committee on pandemic preparedness and how AI could be used to drive drug discovery for social good. So the report is called AI for Public Domain Drug Discovery. And we discuss how AI could be used to considerably reduce the cost of developing new medicines, discover more effective drugs by uncovering new modes of action and exploring larger regions of molecular space. Now, AI can be used also in many areas of the drug development process, better, more efficient clinical trials, more appropriate protein targets, and so on. Now, this requires that appropriate data be collected to be used for these efforts. Unfortunately, there are some policy issues that block the optimal use of AI-driven socially beneficial applications like those I mentioned. The development of new products and services has mostly been put in the hand of private corporations in our society. And even though governments are funding a lot of academic research in terms of the innovation in bringing that research to products, there are not enough investments being made towards innovation that could help to address the SDGs and some of these global challenges. So, why is that? That's basically related to the very nature of our economy. Our competitive market-driven economy has brought lots of good things, but it also means that firms have an incentive to keep for themselves the data and insights and technologies that they gather through their innovation process to stay competitive. Unfortunately, that slows down the overall innovation process. And for example, in the case of AI, where we need the data to drive the advances, that data and those insights and technologies are typically not shared, making it not making it possible for other firms, academics, governments, nonprofit organizations to explore on their end how to use AI to drive innovation.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. We do have a follow-up question. You mentioned all sorts of good reasons for collectively investing and being involved in AI, pandemic preparedness, you mentioned climate change, the SDGs, and yet the investment isn't there. You highlighted briefly a couple of reasons. Could you go a bit more into them, and maybe are there ways, solutions you have to encourage more investment away from the private companies you mentioned?
Absolutely. Away or using different incentives, right? So there are many possible solutions, but let me first go a little bit deeper into why our current economic system isn't working for AI for social good. It's basically about market failures. There are mismatches between what companies are optimizing for their survival and what society needs. So this is what market failures are about. Often they come from the tragedy of the commons. So for example, in dealing with pollution, if there is not a sufficient price on carbon, then there is not enough incentive to develop the innovations that we need to deal with the problem. Now, governments are paying for a lot of services, for example, in the areas of healthcare and education and social services and the environment, but they don't have a really a tradition of investing in the required innovation to make the costs of these social expenses reduced and provide better services. And so we need to think of ways to either for governments to either directly fund the required innovations, not just research and academia, but I mean the R&D that is necessary, or to provide the push and pull incentives for corporations to do the required innovation that society needs. So this is the main part of my message. And I want to mention an example to illustrate that sometimes we all lose if we don't do it. So the example that really worries me a lot is that of antimicrobial resistance. So this is a case where there is a lot of mutations of new variants of microbes, and these mutations are actually moving in a direction that make them resistant to the drugs we currently have, making it necessary to develop new drugs. But unfortunately, the investment to do the required innovation to develop these new drugs is not happening. And it's not happening because it's not profitable for companies to do that work. On the other hand, if we don't do anything at the current trend, there will be 10 million deaths per year by 2050 due to antimicrobial resistance. And the economic costs globally are going to be on the order of $100 trillion US. So, we all have an interest, not just from the point of view of human suffering, but also economically to invest for these, these innovations to prepare for future pandemics and other dealing with other global changes. Well, what can governments do? So there are many areas when they can intervene. They can, for example, one simple thing they can do is they can fund R&D for these socially important goals, but they need to change the formula by which they will help, say, corporations to work on these things, because there's not typically things like 50% coming from government and 50% coming from companies may not be a sufficient incentive. Also, when they provide these funding contracts for innovation, or if they let their state organizations do that research, they should provide strings attached to these contracts. For example, to encourage or force this work to be done in an open science, data sharing way with downstream licensing that's favorable to developing countries. And it's not going to happen magically. It has to be something that's decided and that is put into these contracts so that companies that will do this work, or even academics who will do this work, will be forced to abide by these constraints. And there's a cost for that, because companies value the fact that they can have an exclusive advantage with what they develop. But I think it's the gain in sharing that information, not just to the organizations that are doing the R&D, but other organizations that can take advantage of it, is clearly worth it at the level of society. So to summarize, to address many of the sustainable development goals, governments and international organizations coordinating their efforts should pay attention to the needed investments in socially motivated technological innovation. So that means not just the research that's going on in academia, but what is typically done in corporations to develop new products and services. And they need to pay attention, especially in areas where the social value is great, but there is insufficient private investments, and where the lack of open science development and data sharing hinders progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Benjo. Of course, we'll be coming back to you in our questions round, but we'll move on to our second speaker now. This is scholar, writer, and activist Shoshana Zuboff. She's written 3 major books. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with at least one of them. That's her recent masterwork, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, already published in 26 languages, no less. It's been hailed as the tech industry's silent spring, the Das Kapital, even the wealth of nations of the 21st century. Well, that's illustrious company for Professor Zuboff. Her work has been recognized with the Axel Springer Award, the Epic Lifetime Achievement Award, and the inaugural Global Privacy Assembly Giovanni Buttarelli Award. She's the Charles Edward Wilson Professor Emeritus, Harvard Business School, and a faculty associate at the Harvard Kennedy School's Carr Center for Human Rights. Professor Zuboff, it's in 2014 that you first coined that now famous term, surveillance capitalism. to describe the economic logic centered on what you call the secret massive scale extraction of human generated data and the monetization, of course, of that data. You've also written that surveillance capitalism is on a collision course with democracy. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What are the origins of this collision? How do we see it in our societies?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for such a great question. And also, just to say thank you so much to Secretary General Grynspan, and thank you to the wonderful members of the Secretariat, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so happy to be with you to help kick off this really fruitful, amazing week that you have in store for you on such vital conversations. And I think you'll see that what I have to say today dovetails amazingly well with what Professor Bengio has just been explaining to us, which is so critical. You know, it's difficult to remember that just 2 decades ago, barely 25% of the world's information was digital. Today, nothing escapes this web. It is our shared destiny to live at the dawn of information civilization. What kind of future will this be? What legacy will we leave to our children, our people, and the generations beyond? In an information civilization, our lives are rendered as and mediated by information. But who knows this information? Who decides who knows? Who decides who decides who knows? These are the essential questions of the distribution of knowledge, the authority that governs that distribution, and the power that sustains such authority. And they will define the social order of our information civilization. So today, it is the surveillance capitalist firms, beginning with the giants, Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. These corporations and their ecosystems hold the answers to each of these questions, though we never elected them to govern. In a mere 2 decades, surveillance capitalism grew from baby startups into a global institutional order that now intermediates virtually all human engagement with digital architectures across every domain of everyday life. Growth was enabled by an economic ideology of radical market freedom and a war on terror in which governments learn to depend upon these private companies for population data and monitoring. What began as an American story quickly became a global story. Each month today, in the year 2022, 3 billion people from every region of the world use Facebook, and 90 billion people use Google. Surveillance capitalism originates in an extraordinary realization. It was born at Google in the teeth of financial emergency during the dot-com crash, 2000, 2001. They discovered that every human internet touchpoint leaves behavioral traces which contain rich predictive signals, and that these can be used to infer intimacies that people never intended to share. These surplus behavioral data were claimed as corporate property and computed into predictions, behavioral predictions. Google revolutionized the ad industry by selling the first prediction product known as the click-through rate. They sold to advertisers, and these online advertising markets were the first to trade exclusively in the commodity of human futures. 2 things were evident from the start. First, that data extraction had to occur on a massive scale. Second, that it had to be secret. Why? Without secrecy, it would attract user resistance. And most threatening of all, it would attract law. Surveillance capitalism was founded on this illicit, illegitimate, but not yet illegal bed of sand. in these machine systems, personal information is a bulk commodity like tons of wheat or barrels of oil. It is valued for volume and variety. Information is by design severed from its meaning. Systems cannot distinguish between information integrity and corruption. Why? Because revenues do not depend upon information integrity. Think about that. Like every institutional order, surveillance capitalism develops. And so far, we can see 4 stages of this developmental process. I want to briefly define these because it's so important to understand that as we look around and we see some of the social wreckage left behind by surveillance capitalism, we tend to silo it and think that it's distinct problems, rather than understanding that it is all a growing impact of one organic unitary process. Each stage is defined by novel economic operations, new governance authorities, and each produces new social harms. So the first stage, as I've described a little bit, lays the foundation in the secret, massive scale extraction of human-generated data. The corporations assume property rights and decision rights over once private human experience. The social consequences include the wholesale destruction of privacy in our time. In the second stage, the machines and people required to build the computational means of knowledge production are concentrated in the surveillance empires. These are precisely what Professor Benjo was describing: machine learning, artificial intelligence. The giants and their ecosystems dominate the global market structure of AI. This is the realpolitik. They leverage their illicit data collection, secret massive scale data collection in stage 1, now to govern the distribution of knowledge. And they direct their vast capabilities for their own economic benefit. Data and knowledge come from the people, but they are not for the people. The social consequence is a new access of inequality, defined by the growing gap between what I can know and what can be known about me. In the third stage, this knowledge is transformed into power, weaponized as targeting algorithms, engineered to tune, herd, and shape behavior in ways that maximize extraction, prediction, and revenue. Machine systems blindly favor the most corrupt information because it best fulfills those economic metrics which are engineered into the systems, baked into the cake. These operations disrupt the integrity of individual and collective behavior, while their formal indifference to information integrity produces information chaos, poisoning social discourse, and driving polarization. In the fourth stage, the giants leverage their control over critical information systems and infrastructure now to compete for public governance. I'm going to offer just one quick example. Early in the pandemic, Apple and Google released their exposure notification protocol in the EU. And then they refused the pleas of democratically elected officials to adapt their operating systems to host the exposure and tracing apps that had been developed under EU governance for use by public health authorities during the worst public health emergency in a century. Surveillance capitalism's whirlwind developmental journey reveals a zero-sum dynamic in which the deepening institutional order of surveillance economics propagates democratic disorder, eroding the social fabric as the prelude to a wider contest over the politics of knowledge in our emerging civilization. We anticipated a golden digital age of democratization of knowledge. And that dream may yet be realized, but right now, the abdication of our information and communication spaces to surveillance capitalism has us stumbling toward a future that we did not and would not choose, an accidental dystopia. The time has come for a reckoning with the most basic questions of an information civilization. Who will know? Who will decide? Who will decide who decides? The answers reflect the long human story of our compulsion to learn and to improve our conditions of existence through knowledge. We need data. We need information and knowledge, but applied to the real needs of people and society, just as Professor Bengio was describing to us. The prospects for humane and just societies, for social solidarity, for pro-social innovation and shared prosperity and inclusive development, and most profoundly for the endurance and sustenance of democratic principles and governance. All of these wholly depend upon the collective work that summons us in this decade. New charters of rights, the laws to protect them, and the public institutions to govern them, all of it purpose-built for our time. I hope that this will become our legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zuboff. Dystopian indeed was kind of what was going through my mind, what you were talking about there, of course, but it's not unfamiliar to any of us who have had any experience with Facebook or any of the other social media platforms. I'm just wondering if you have any solutions to how we wrestle ownership back from these tech giants. I mean, we did hear from Professor Bengio a kind of radical new business model to encourage investment, for the public good in AI. Do you see any hope for taking back ownership and creating something which is much more, as you said, to support democracy rather than undermine it? Professor Zuboff, can you unmute yourself, please?
All right, here we go. Thank you so much. All right, I wanted to say that I am very optimistic. You know, in the industrial century, we began that climb into industrial civilization with the owners of capital, the owners of the factories having all the rights, and workers and consumers having no rights, no laws, no institutions to protect them. But in most of our societies, we changed that. We changed it decisively, and we tethered industrialism to the aspirations of our people and our societies. That is the kind of work that lies before us today. This is political work. Most of what has to happen now to get to Professor Bengio's solutions has to start in the political realm. We need laws. Surveillance capitalism is founded on wholly illegitimate operations that if there had been even a little bit of comprehensive privacy legislation in the United States, everything that I've just described to you would have been illegal right from the start. But unfortunately, in the United States, where these processes began, there were no laws to protect citizens. So this is the work before us now. We need a public that is mobilized. We need lawmakers who understand deeply, who feel the public at their backs and are ready to act. And we need transnational collaboration. And, you know, I've been working on this subject for many, many years, 43 years to be actually precise. It's only in the past 3 years that we really see movement on all of these three fronts. We see a public rupture of faith with this whole institutional order that I've described to you. We see lawmakers really taking for the first time important strides. We see it in the UK, we see it in the US, and we see it in Europe, in the EU, most especially, where path-breaking new legislation has just made its way through the EU Parliament. And that is not the end, but the beginning of this great comprehensive work that we must do toward identifying the knowledge rights, the new laws, and the new public institutions that will protect us as we march into this century, so that it can be a flourishing and democratic and sustaining and inclusive digital century. I am very, very optimistic. This third decade that we have just entered into, to me, is pivotal. This is the time to act. It's not too late, and there's no time to waste.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Zuboff, and perhaps most especially for ending on that note of optimism. I think that motivates us all. To our third speaker now, Darren Acemoglu. He is professor at MIT, an elected fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, the British Academy of Sciences, Turkish Academy of Sciences, going around the continents now, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and many more. His work covers a wide range of areas, including political economy, economic development, growth, technological change, inequality, labor economics, and the economics of networks. He's received a number of academic prizes, among others, the John Bates Clark Medal, given to economists under the age of 40, judged to have made the most significant contribution to economic thought and knowledge. Professor Acemoglu, welcome. You have argued that the root of many of the recent economic and political crises is the direction of technological change towards more automation. You say that automation has led to increased equality on the one hand between capital and labor, and on the other hand between high and low education workers. Could you elaborate on how this actually happens and the socio-economic and political consequences of that?
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and actually my comments are very complementary to Shoshana's. I am a recovering techno-optimist. I have spent a lot of my career working on technologies, emphasizing how they have been important in some of the great achievements of humanity, including major progress against poverty. Francis Bacon viewed technology as the handmaiden of human dominion over nature. But at some level, it's also a tool for human domination over other humans. And the question is, what determines the balance between how we use technology to expand what we do and how we use technology to empower one group at the expense of another? A lot of my work argues and documents that automation, though it has been a central part of what technology does, also has an element of human dominion over humans, because it enables employers to sideline workers, and it makes the prosperity that technological change generates non-shared in general. In particular, when you look at periods in which automation was rampant and there weren't other countervailing forces, either institutional, for example, increasing worker power, or technological, other uses of technology, for example, new tasks and new functions that increase worker marginal productivity, then technological change came with impoverishment of millions of people. Shared prosperity set in when automation went hand in hand with other more worker-friendly uses of technology. Over the last 60 years, and especially over the last 40 years, digital technologies unfortunately have moved in a much more rapid automation direction. my work documents that much of the huge rise in inequality in the United States and much of the rest of the Western world cannot be understood without this automation aspect of technology. For instance, about 50 to 70% of the increase in inequality within the US is tied to automation. Now, there are two sets of arguments that are given to point out that this isn't so bad. One is that productivity growth is taking place and it will naturally trickle down to the rest of the population. And two, that the future is going to be brighter. Unfortunately, there isn't very strong evidence supporting either of these two claims. Productivity increases actually have been rather disappointing from digital technologies. And my work suggests that that is partly due to the fact that we have gone too much in the automation direction. We have left a lot of low-hanging fruit unpicked. And in fact, going counter to the claims of many technology leaders, the specific way in which we are developing technologies, digital technologies, is a choice. There is nothing inherent in the nature of digital technologies, nor in the nature of AI, that says that it should be used for automation. AI in particular, as a broad technological platform, can be utilized for myriad different functions, and many of them that could be very human complementary, creating new tasks, new platforms for humans to share information and to perform much more meaningful jobs. It is a function and an outcome of who controls technology: large companies, the tech sector, and what their incentives and priorities are. This is true for much of the technological developments of the last 30, 40 years. AI, I see as the next act in this play. It is deepening these fissures, and in a way that I find quite dangerous for complementary reasons to what Shoshana was emphasizing. And since these problems are sometimes perceived to be Western world problems, I also want to end by pointing out that far from it, I think the biggest threat that AI poses to economic livelihood is not actually in the West, but in the developing world. In the 1970s, an inspiring group of economists, such as Francis Stewart and others, articulated ideas about appropriate technology, worrying that the technologies developed and then exported to the developing world from the West were not appropriate to the conditions in these emerging economies. For example, they could be too capital intensive, or they could be much more targeted for working in large corporations while smaller firms were dominant in these sectors. I argue that AI is actually the mother of all inappropriate technologies. It is remaking the international division of labor, and it will rapidly spread throughout the rest of the world. But AI utilizes huge amount of data, very skilled labor, and capital to replace
with apologies for the interruption. Just to confirm, it was agreed that the interpretation will now cease. Thank you for your understanding.
No developing nation has scored rapid growth without making best use of its human resources, which are typically low skill and semi-skilled workers. So as AI spreads, I think it will be a hugely disruptive technology to the rest of the world. And the problem is, I think we are, of course, right now focused on many immediate huge dangers, such as Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine and other defining problems. But I believe AI's impact on the developing world deserves as much attention because it's going to define the future of much of humanity. And in closing, I want to reiterate that I sharply disagree with the technology experts who think that AI has a preordained path and it's just following that path, and anything on its way is collateral damage we have to put up with. All of this is a choice, and its impact on the rest of the world is a choice that is quite costly for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Atamoglu. A quick follow-up for you before we go to our final speaker. You have a book recently out, The Narrow Corridor, and what you mean by the narrow corridor is this balance between state and society, and you say that we need that for them to work together, for democracy to thrive. And you argue that digital technologies have weakened democracy and made it much harder for this balance, or you made the corridor narrower. Could you just elaborate a bit on that? You started with your remarks about artificial intelligence, but just give us a few more details on how that process works.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. I didn't have time to touch on that in my comments, but obviously, technology has sometimes been a tremendous force towards progress. And when that has happened, I think history teaches us, is precisely when there was a balance between state and society, in particular embedded in democratic institutions or other institutions that enabled bottom-up participation of regular people, ordinary people in politics. That sort of participation was an integral element that ensured technology did not go in a fully automation or fully elite favoring direction. So moving into the future, the same sort of balance between state and society, the narrow corridor or democratic institutions broadly construed, are critical. But I also worry, I've worried both in the narrow corridor, and my concerns have intensified in my writings and in my thinking, that the effects of AI technologies, precisely because of the reasons that Shoshana also articulated, as they concentrate data and power in the hands of a few actors, are actually quite threatening to the lifeblood of democracy, and ominously precisely when we need democracy more than ever, because we need to redirect technological change that can only happen in a productive way via democratic processes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you, of course, as well as our other speakers for closing remarks and for the questions, but it's time for our final speaker. Now, this is Professor Carlota Perez. She is a British Venezuelan scholar, international consultant, specialized in the social and economic impact of technological change. She's honorary professor at IIP UCL, at University of Sussex, as well as at Caltech Estonia, the author of the influential Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, The Dynamics of Bubbles and Golden Ages. Her career began in the civil service in the 1980s. She's worked for Latin American governments, multilateral organizations like the OECD, the World Bank, and the European Union, and global corporations, IBM, Cisco, Telefonica, Ericsson. So she really knows this business from the inside and the out. She is academic in residence at Anthemis UK, and her current research project, Beyond the Technological Revolution, analyzes the social shaping of technology and the historical role of the state in defining the actual context for innovation. Professor Perez, in your book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, you lay out a history of 5 technological revolutions that will follow a similar pattern: bubbles, crash, recession, and then hopefully renewal and a golden age. You suggested that we are currently at a time when the golden age should be unleashed. May not feel like that to us at the moment. So tell us why exactly you think the time's right for a golden age. Could you unmute yourself, please, Professor Perez?
I thought you could do it automatically. Okay, thank you. Yes, I have actually sounded very optimistic. As the preceding speakers have made clear, we are at a critical moment when we already know the power of the new technologies for both good and bad outcomes, for contributing to human well-being or for harming society and threatening our best values. So we have causes for optimism as well as for pessimism. Of course, in the current times, it is difficult to be optimistic, and yet history can be a source of hope. The first thing to note is that we are midway along the fifth technological revolution. I'm not going to discuss the fourth or the fifth, that's a complicated issue. To me, it's the fifth, and it means that we can learn from the previous four. And what my research since the 1980s has shown is that the pattern of diffusion of such major changes in market economies begins by a turbulent process of creative destruction, forcing the adoption of the new, more productive technologies, while destroying jobs, skills, industries, and even whole regions. The process divides society into winners and losers. On the bright side, there are new millionaires, new successful products, emerging industries and countries, amazing new technologies, as well as powerful infrastructures. First, there were railways and telegraph, then steamships, tramways and electricity, then automobiles, highways and airplanes, and now mobile phones and the almost incredible internet. But while some benefit from all this, many others suffer. And the bumpy road includes booms and crashes, after which the recessions, violence, and resentment of the victims can lead to the success of autocratic and populist leaders. It has happened every time. It is only then, when the dangers and the harmful consequences of the new technologies become fully visible. It's only then that society tends to wake up to the urgencies and bold leaders decide to tilt the playing field, to tilt it, even if it's level, tilt it with a socially positive direction, a positive directionality for innovation and investment. And that is when the golden ages have occurred. The Victorian boom, the Belle Epoque in Europe, what the Americans call the progressive era, the post-war boom that the French referred to as the glorious 30. And that is how progress occurs in capitalism, unequally, irregularly, unfairly, but undoubtedly. The process coming from the satanic mills of early industrialization to what we can define today as middle-class lives in the welfare states of the advanced countries has indeed been a very bumpy road. The difficult question is whether policy could shape the current information revolution towards a smart, green, fair, and global path. The answer begins by seeing how previous revolutions have been shaped in different countries and even in different systems. The same mass production Fordist revolution was shaped by the autocratic regimes of Stalin and Hitler and by the various democracies of the West according to their values. But it is interesting to note that even in these, a proactive state was necessary. The democracies of the West reincorporated the state that had been put out of the way in the US, for instance, in the Roaring 20s. Markets alone simply cannot do it. There is no way that markets will solve the social, environmental problems, etc., on their own, because markets are the context for markets. The decisions that are common to everybody, the notion about possibilities in the market is actually a common context. And that context is either created by the state or not created at all. And then we just have like the Far West, which we've been having for the last 40 years, as Shoshana just showed us. It was only when Keynesian policies were fully adopted that dynamic growth and full employment were achieved. It was when labor unions were empowered for collective bargaining that the growth in productivity turned into increasing wages. And it was only when these higher wages were accompanied by unemployment insurance and pensions that the shift to mass production from mass consumption could occur. Of course, we can question the environmental consequences of such a golden age. And we can also point that it was only golden for the advanced West, leaving the so-called third world out. It was meant to produce cheap energy and materials. But that is what the history of capitalism has shown. Each revolution incorporates new layers and new countries into the good life and leaves others behind. This is perhaps the first time that we could have a truly global golden age. So that is my answer to your question.
Again, I'm delighted to hear you ending on a note of optimism. So, but of course, our question is going to be, how do we get there to this golden age? We've heard of the challenges already in tackling what is owned largely in digital technology, information technology, largely owned at the moment by private individuals.
Yeah, well, basically, we need to define what a golden age is. Golden ages are simply win-win gains between business and society orchestrated by government. They are a practical recognition that capitalism is only legitimate if wealth creation benefits broader and broader layers of society. The early turbulent times install the more powerful technologies, but bring forth anger, resentment, and even violence, which all end up forcing change. So it is in order to save the system that business ends up accepting regulation, union power, and higher taxes. They realize that stability is at stake, and they also recognize that those taxes ultimately benefit business too, through growing demand from consumers and government. The Cold War and suburbanization were the two directions given by social democracies in the post-war boom. The one brought the frontier technologies that are the core of today's revolution, computers, even microprocessors, because they were the demand, and of course the internet. So the other, the suburbanization direction, was the one that brought the American way of life, copied by everybody across the world to improve lives of many. In fact, among the essential elements of golden ages, there are always shifts in lifestyles, because these provide new demands, which promote investment and employment, replacing the jobs that the new technologies destroyed. Just imagine the hundreds of thousands of jobs that a rental and maintenance economy or a model could bring. But neither the directions nor the specific way of life to promote are arbitrary decisions. You don't take them like a rabbit out of a hat. They have always been an intensification of existing trends, which are themselves a response to what the new technologies make possible. The massive move from products to services, as we've seen, for example, in music, in books, in all the things that we now stream rather than buy physically, that's an obvious trend that needs to be accelerated to cover many more spaces. How is directionality achieved by government? Well, simply through combining taxes, subsidies, regulations, education, and training, new institutions, local, national, supranational, investment, innovation, direct by the state, missions, and so on. all the instruments of governance are used every time, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes with more imagination, sometimes with less. But they are all modernized by the new technologies and aimed in the agreed directions. We cannot use the ones from the last golden age. We've got to design proper ones, just as Shoshana was talking about, just as we were looking at the actual technologies we are trying to shape. And we've got to also shape ourselves. The institutions themselves have to become modern. Too much old bureaucracy, too many old rules that are not really applicable, that are not really appropriate. And we are not yet creating the really appropriate ones for this century, for this type of technology, and the way to act in order to enhance them. So we might fail. But that is how we could get to a smart, green, fair, and global golden age now. Let's not miss the opportunity. It would be a tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Perez. I think we're all certainly motivated by that appeal. I'm informed, unfortunately, that we're running over time, so we're not going to have time for questions, apart from I have one quickfire roundup question for each of our panelists, and I hope it reflects, since you are not getting the opportunity, I hope it reflects things that you want to ask. All of our speakers, and thank you all very much for the insight there, have argued for a more intervention, if you like, from governments in shaping this ongoing technological fifth revolution, as Carlotta put it. Could I ask each of you, starting with Professor Bengio, to have a look, give us one concrete example of something recent governmental policy which you think is positive, going in this direction, harnessing new technology for the common good. Professor Bengio, as I said, we will start with you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, there are not that many good examples recently of governments funding socially beneficial innovation directly. So they do invest in academia, and yeah, so there are examples also of governments creating better incentives for companies to develop socially beneficial outcomes, as for example, a case of the UK recently to make sure that pharmaceutical companies will deliver needed antibiotics, changing the way to price these things so that there would be an incentive for these kinds of things. So these are good examples. Another good example is, of course, the recent work in the EU for new legislation around AI, which is moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Professor Zuboff, we'll go to you next. You mentioned the European Union in your earlier address as having some positive moves in the right direction. Do you have a particular example you could share with us? Can you unmute yourself, please, Professor Zuboff?
Thank you. I have an example that integrates a few of our important themes. You know, I mentioned we need public mobilization, and we need mobilization among our lawmakers, and then we need that transnational coordination. And I'm, you know, looking for examples that give us, you know, what Darren was talking about, the bottom up as well as the top down, and the promise of institutionalization that we've all been touching on. So here's something that makes me very optimistic. So if we go a year ago, it was actually March 24th last year, congressional hearings in my country, in the United States, we had one Congresswoman, Anna Eshoo, who spoke at that hearing. It was on disinformation. And she said at that hearing that she was going to introduce, quote, an act to ban micro-targeting in political advertising. And then if we fast forward to the year 2022, just earlier this year in January, Congresswoman Eshoo, Congresswoman Chakowski, Senator Cory Booker, they introduced a bill that was called Banning Surveillance Advertising. Now, other things had been happening in between those 2 points. In the summer of 2021, a who's who of global civil rights and human rights groups introduced to the European Parliament a petition. And that petition was called a petition to ban surveillance advertising. And that same summer, 2021, a congresswoman from the United States Congress, a member of the European Parliament, Alexandra Giza, these two got together and had a public event on the subject of banning surveillance-based advertising. And then we roll up to the early fall of 2021, and we have another civil rights organization in the United States called Accountable Tech, and they submitted a petition to our Federal Trade Commission, which oversees privacy issues because we don't have a federal privacy office. And they introduced a petition for rulemaking that would, quote, ban surveillance advertising. So here we have something quite extraordinary. And we end up just recently, as the European Parliament was concluding its final amendments to the Digital Services Act, just a little over a month ago. And in one of those amendments, which did stand and has stood so far, there is a specific amendment that will begin by banning surveillance advertising for children, but also extends to including the current stipulations of Article 9.1, which would also ban most kinds of surveillance-based data collection from adults as well. So here we have one example, banning surveillance advertising. It's not the whole apple. It's not everything that we need to do, but it is a kind of, arrow at the heart of the original foundations of surveillance capitalism. And the key thing that we see here is that this institution of surveillance capitalism has made us believe that it is inevitable. This is also a theme that Darren introduced, the idea that everything we're experiencing is somehow a technology story, intractable, inexorable, foreordained. Well, of course, that's all gaslighting. That's all propaganda. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is not a technology story. It's a power story. And nothing here is inevitable. And what we see here in this example that I've given you is the shift, which is going to be essential to move this grassroots and top-down new collaboration. The shift is from accepting inevitability with resignation and indignation, but nonetheless sort of stoop shoulders. And on the other hand, understanding that what was settled can be unsettled. What was undiscussable can be discussed. What was inevitable can be undone. And it really is not that hard once we understand that. And I just wanted to add before I leave you that I believe in this so strongly, and that this is the moment. I just wanted it to share with all of you listening today that I've recently undertaken to co-chair a new entity called the International Observatory on Information and Democracy. The aim here is to integrate research and real-world developments in the information and democracy space for easy translation to lawmakers and to policymakers all over the world in every country, to be a resource for transnational collaboration. And I look forward to working with the UN. I look forward to working with many of you. And I'm just sharing this because it is a statement of how much I believe that this is within our grasp, but we have to act now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zubov, for sharing that new initiative with us, certainly of interest to many member states, I'm sure. Darren Achabolu, the last quick fire question to you. Any particular developments you have seen that will set us closer on the path to Carlota Perez's golden age?
Well, time is short, but let me be brief. Shoshana already gave an excellent example, but actually, I think the standards that I am requiring are even higher because I would like such intervention to change the direction of technology. Fortunately, there are plenty of examples. HIV/AIDS, starting with an activist movement and then influencing an unwilling set of government agencies. When it actually happened, it quickly changed the direction of medical research and produced a lot of drugs and now a vaccine against HIV. Climate change, after decades of foot dragging, once the public pressure was sufficiently strong, governments started taking some small measures in terms of carbon taxes and support for renewables. And over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen an enormous improvement in the cost of renewables. Solar technology used to be about 80 times as expensive as fossil fuels. Today it's cheaper. Wind power used to be about 10 times as expensive as fossil fuel. Today it's cheaper. And these are just some of the examples where you see small amounts of government action, when especially triggered by societal pressure, can have formative influences on the direction of technology. And there is little doubt in my mind that the same can be done in AI and digital technologies as well.
Thank you very much. Final words to you then, Professor Perez. Just wondering if you have a particular example of where policy is going in the right direction.
Yes, thank you. I do. I actually think that the work that Mariana Mazzucato is doing, getting people to organize, getting governments to organize innovation, collective innovation, together with business and together with universities and researchers and all that, in specific directions in what she calls missions. Taking the example from the moonshot in the 1960s and 70s, when it was possible to get a man walking on the moon by spending millions and millions and millions of dollars in doing that. But the whole issue of being able to decide on specific goals with specific time, with specific budgets, and bringing everybody together in consensus strategies, now a better atmosphere, because there are two facts that show that the tide is beginning to turn. As you can imagine, business is the toughest part of the change. The whole idea of stakeholder capitalism is now flowing, and there is, the SDG, the ESG, the environment, society and governance, which is now being used even by the financial sector, which is quite amazing. That whole movement in that direction is creating a better atmosphere. And at the same time, there is something wonderful of the horrendous pandemic. And it is that everybody had to run to government. Everybody understood that this idea that markets solve everything is ridiculous. And government came in, and governments did unimaginable things. Just the idea of furloughing the workers, sending money directly to everybody in an envelope. I mean, this whole madness of government help is so wonderful, because it shows that really, unless we do it all together and unless we give direction, we will never get there. And this missions example is a good one. And the context, I think, is better than ever. We are beginning to create a context. And I love Shoshana's example of what's happening too, because every one of the spaces is a difficult space. And we have to move at the same time through all the spaces. We have to regulate finance, stop tax avoidance, and this whole game of of moving money around and taking and not paying taxes and all that. That has to be stopped. There are so many things, but they're beginning to happen. I do see many things that the tide, showing that the tide is turning.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Perez. That brings us to the end of this conversation with great minds. Thank you for your attention. I, at least, found this really, really interesting and challenging. Takes a bit through the pitfalls and dangers to some really optimistic, motivational solutions, which we can all take away with us. So perhaps we could all thank our four great minds, Joshua Bengio, Shoshana Zuboff, Darren Achimolu, and Carlota Perez. And I wish all of you a very successful end of continuation of this week. It's only Monday here at CTSD. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mrs. Fox, for having moderated this special session. I also wish to thank all the speakers today for their valuable contribution. Before we adjourn, I wanted to inform you that the Secretariat has made available at the back of the room a note prepared by the Bureau on its assessment of the CSTD. This note is based on comments received from the membership and will be presented on Friday afternoon by Mr. Peter Major. Finally, please note that the informal negotiations on the two draft resolution, STI and WISS, will start tomorrow morning at 10 in this room. A WebEx link was also circulated to member states for those who wish to follow the proceeding online. I would urge everyone to keep the resolution, I would say, updated as minimum as we can, as we have very limited delegates in the room and we cannot have a full negotiation on the full text. So I wish the Vice Chair the best for tomorrow morning negotiation. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.